Tetris, created by Spectrum Holobyte, is the best-selling video game of all time as of August 2018. It has sold 177 million copies since its release in 1984. The second best-selling video game is Minecraft, created by Mojang, is sitting at 144 million sales since its release in 2011. So, why does this matter? Because these two games help us understand a lot about gaming as a whole than you would initially think. Hi everyone, it's Nick. Back to talk about another topic that is very relevant to the way that we play games. Growing up, the only way that these video games were distributed was with a physical copy. Technically, digital distribution has been around since the 1980s, but it didn't see a surge in popularity until a couple decades later. In the early 2000s, there was finally an opportunity to purchase digital copies of games due to the advancements of broadband capabilities. So why mention Tetris, Minecraft, and their release dates? Because Minecraft has the potential to surpass Tetris, even though it was released almost 30 years later. You can argue that the game industry was bigger today, which it is, but one of the reasons that it can do this is digital distribution. So let's look at the issues that arise when you compare the two different types of ways that you can really purchase games. The first issue that you can consider when looking at this argument is the limited copies that come with the physical version of the game. Before, if you wanted that larger game, you would need to get the hardware to play it. Hardware had storage limitations at the time, which really isn't an issue now. One of the reasons Square stopped developing for Nintendo and moved to Sony was because of Nintendo's decision to use cartridges for the N64 console, which they were huge developers and supporters of the earlier Super Nintendo. CDs could just hold more in them, and using cartridges created more of a restraint on these developers. In both of these cases though, each game would come with a good amount of hardware that essentially takes up space, and now in this situation I'm talking about like physical space. Digital copies don't have this issue. While digital copies do take up storage space on a console, they won't clutter up a room or a game case. You can also see physical copies become harder to get as the years go on. Waste is another huge factor when weighing these two options. With each physical copy of a game that gets purchased, it goes with a box or a case that many people have a tendency to throw away due to the convenience of having a game case to hold all your games, and not just one. While I love the box art that comes with these games, the waste that gets generated with these game cases should not be ignored. While still in college, I worked for an injection molding plant, and I can say from first-hand experiences that these cases do not cost that much to manufacture, especially when you make them in bulk. Out of that $60 price tag, the case costs a fraction of that. The cost of making these games is a non-factor here, but the waste that they can create is especially an issue when you're trying to save the earth in any single way that you can. The next one to consider is transferring the game when you want to play it with a friend. Split-screen multiplayer is dying, #sad, and it's a hassle to carry a console to a friend's house just to play a game. Physical copies of a game can allow you to bring that game to a friend's house, or allow them to borrow the game, which I think is the biggest benefit of having a physical copy. You and your neighborhood friends don't have a lot of money, so you had one friend get Mario Kart, one friend get Tony Hawk Pro Skater, another one get Star Wars Battlefront 2, and I'm talking about the good one here, etc. Especially when I was younger, this was a very popular way to play games that I couldn't afford. You can still do this, but the time it takes to install the game and update it kind of hurts that immediately jump into that game that I really loved. Damage on the disc or cartridge is a possibility that can hurt resale value in the product. While I keep all of my copies of the games in as pristine condition as I can, it still doesn't stop the fact that some of these games can stop working over time. Keeping the games in good condition can increase the longevity of it, but it doesn't guarantee it from lasting forever. Digital copies don't really have resale value, so there's another trade-off here. If you like to sell the games back after you're done playing them, or if you like collecting games, physical copies are probably your preferred way to go. If you don't want to worry about the potential damage, digital is probably a better situation for you. Now we're going to talk about storage space, because it really needs to be remembered in this discussion too. When you're buying a console nowadays, the storage information pretty much comes right on the front cover of the box. This is extremely crucial as games are larger now, and storage space is a necessity for these games. What is a common practice now, especially to save on cost, is to uninstall a game when you aren't playing that game in the time, and you can re-download it later if you want to keep playing it. Earlier game consoles didn't really need this as games were a lot smaller in size and could be booted up without those really long loading screens. It doesn't become an issue in every console, but if the console does require you to install the game before playing, it might not make a difference which version you choose. The NES and SNES Classic is an interesting take on this whole physical versus digital game debate. For those of you who don't know about these things, Nintendo released a mini version of the console, preloaded with multiple of their hit games for that system. I'm talking like Metroid, Zelda, Castlevania, Mario, etc. They did this due to their Virtual Console games still having that huge cult following. Please give us GameCube games for the Switch. And you might hear that Nintendo games are timeless, and this is basically their way of answering the people's call. This was a huge, really, product for a couple of reasons. One of the reasons is because it's basically a Nintendo licensed emulator. It had multiple pieces of the game's software for the system all on one piece of hardware. It's kind of breaks all the arguments that we made earlier as well. Other companies have done something similar, like with the Sega Genesis Collection, and there are some companies that should put out something like this. Sony, especially with most of the TVs getting rid of the necessary ports just to play these games. It's nice to have a way to play the classics with HDMI inputs, because it's starting to become an issue. So what does this boil down to? And a lot of this comes down to the convenience factor and what makes it easier for people to buy your product, just consumers in general. The reason that Amazon became so popular is the way that digital copies of games became popular too. If you want the game, you can buy it from your couch, and why not? It's easier than driving to a game store to pick up a copy of a game where it might not even be in stock. Digital copies usually remain the same price, while the physical copies can actually fluctuate quite a bit too. When trying to find a copy of Conker's Bad Fur Day for the N64, the prices were through the roof. The physical copy was rare. Get it? And it can be considered a collector's item now. If a game was released at a later time when digital distribution was a popular way to play games, it probably wouldn't be as hard to find a physical copy, or the physical copy probably doesn't cost as much to find. If you couldn't tell, I like the physical copies of games. I keep really good care of my games, and I love having the box art for them too. It's almost like a mini collection, and I love it when people get to look through the games that I have and start a conversation of some of the ones that they really want to play. I do get frustrated that physical and digital copies are the same price, but really the cost to put the game on the disc itself really is a non-factor here because it costs them pennies maybe. Convenience tells me to buy the digital copy, but I like the feel that it comes when you get the physical copy of the game. It's like a mini collection again, and I rarely resell these games. Most of the indie games I'll get digitally, but games like Zelda, Xenoblade, and Pokemon, they just feel right to have the physical version of the game. The feeling of having that physical copy you love will always be better than purchasing a digital copy. This feeling might not be the same for the newer gamers out there, but my preference will always be towards the physical copy that games have. Let me know what you think of these discussion videos again. If there's any topics you want me to tackle, put them in the comment section below. Once again, this is Nick, signing off.